Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com. And this week, I'm delighted to introduce a very special guest on the show. We have with us today Dr. Shaheen Lakhan, who is the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at Click Therapeutics, which is focused on developing software as prescription medical treatments for people with unmet medical needs. The company is specifically developing digital therapeutics, which involve the delivery of prescription treatments to patients' smartphones and pairing software with therapeutics. So a very interesting, very niche field. Very excited to learn more about it from Dr. Lakhan. And so Click Therapeutics is developing digital therapeutics in different areas, including indications in psychiatry, neurology, oncology, immunology, and cardiometabolic diseases as well. And in collaboration with Otsuka, Click Therapeutics most recently developed the very first prescription digital therapeutic, Rejoin, authorized by the FDA for the adjunctive treatment of major depressive disorder symptoms. Dr. Lakhan is an inventive entrepreneurial physician scientist who is board certified in neurology and pain medicine with over 20 years of industry experience. As Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at Click Therapeutics and a board director at SpineThera, Dr. Lakhan spearheads AI-enabled clinical development and drug delivery platforms. So to learn more about digital therapeutics and how they're shaping the industry, let's turn to Dr. Lakhan now. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ayesha.
So I'd like to start off just by knowing more about what exactly prescription digital therapeutics are. It sounds like such an exciting, innovative field and space, but I'm not sure if many in our audience are really familiar with the concept or what exactly this class of therapeutics is. And so could you give us an overview of what they are, how the field came into being with some of the history, and how they're currently shaping the industry?
Oh, sure. Let me try to make it less daunting for the audience because it's a mouthful. Prescription digital therapeutics, or sometimes abbreviated as PDTs. In essence, it is using what everyone pretty much has either in their pocket or in their hands, a smartphone, using applications, mobile applications that sit on their smartphone to either treat, manage, or prevent a disease or condition. So this is basically software as medicine. The software or application becomes the therapeutic intervention, much like prescription drugs are. And in order to make bold claims like that you're able to treat or manage a disease, you got to show the evidence packages. So these are studied and built by scientists and physicians, and notably by engineers and product specialists, together with patients in a very patient-centric fashion. They are put into phased development, much like clinical trials that you have for drug trials. And the same regulatory bodies in the United States, it's the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, gives a special clearance if you meet the right evidence standards. Evidence for efficacy, meaning it's working towards its intended goal of treating or managing a disease. Evidence towards safety, meaning it's not adding any safety burden that you can't mitigate against. And then tolerability as well. And that is the equivalent of engagement in our field.
Wonderful. And so how did the field come into being in terms of when exactly was this class or this space of medicine sort of when it came into inception? Is it with the smartphone, or were there ideas or concepts of this kind of medicine leading up to what we have today now?
Yeah, very much so. So if you kind of look at the evolution or history of medicine, every 10 to 20 years, there's this major cataclysmic type of event that forces a transformation. And it used to start off with small molecules, and then it became biologics. So these are small little peptides or proteins that treat many diseases, largely autoimmune diseases and so on. Cell-based therapies for cancer, you name it, right? We're attacking every type of cancer. Genomic editing, including CRISPR technology. And the latest is now prescription digital therapeutics. How did it come about? Well, you had to advance the smartphone technology to handle the complex engines, the what we call the back end, right, of what these prescription digital therapeutics actually run on. Two, you had to get major penetration. Most people than not, right, have a smartphone that is of a generation that could handle this, these types of applications. Third, we had to get the health regulators on board, the FDA, namely in the United States, but there are equivalents outside the United States. They actually have very clear pathways for these to get approved, reviewed, regulated, and so on. And then you have to have innovative manufacturers and developers like Click Therapeutics in this space. So all of this transpired in the last 10 years and so. And in fact, I can now divide it into two generations. The first generation, which I call PDT 1.0, where the field was translating what was already delivered in face-to-face therapy by therapists or by physicians with their patients, largely cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the talk therapy, right? And so the field invented ways of taking what is traditionally done one-on-one, applying it into a smartphone, and getting products approved, based on hitting some of the endpoints that are out there, largely in psychiatric or mental health and coping type of diseases. But we have emerged beyond that over the past, maybe 2 and 3 years. Rejoin is a perfect example of one of the trailblazing PDT 2.0, or the next generation of PDT type of software as medicine. And what do I mean by that? Well, now we're going beyond just behavioral interventions and cognitive behavioral therapy and actually doing brain or neuromodulation. I think we all know what neuroplasticity is. Our brains are not static. You're not just born with the same synapses and receptors and circuitry, right, that you have right now as an adult, whether you have a disease or condition or not, that all changes. But also through learned behavior, through a series of practice, you could train different parts of the brain to rebuild a faulty circuit. And that is the cornerstone of PDT 2.0. Neuromodulation coupled with cognitive behavioral therapy, and then AI-driven personalization. Why is it that, when it comes to a drug, we pretty much give the same drug to everyone? It could be a man, woman, different zip codes, different chemistries, different experiences, right? But you get almost the same dosage and the dosage form of that drug. We have the ability to do custom individualization, personalization using PDTs in the 2.0 model. That's the new wave.
And so, Dr. Lakhan, how did you get involved in the field as a neurologist? And you did mention about the evolution of neuromodulation and the incorporation of these kinds of technologies, including AI and all of that. So how did you get involved, and what led you to Click Therapeutics specifically?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's I think the story behind our products and our assets is always meaningful, in that I used to be, a practicing neurologist full-time, first and foremost, a department chair, and I built all of these, different faculty programs. And then I was a drug developer and discoverer. And these were targeting postpartum depression, the first drug approved for that. They were targeting aspects of multiple sclerosis, neurodegenerative diseases. And I've always been kind of technically savvy as well, and always testing the limits of every discipline of medicine. And I came to a realization, we're not harvesting and harnessing all of this great technology and sciences into drug discovery and development. And so I did something in the pharma world where I led digital health departments and teams and transformation efforts until around a few years ago. It was 4 years ago, I joined at Click Therapeutics. And I'm like, let me do this primarily. Let's lead first with the software, and then we can marry the drug components to it and advance this new field together. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And so what are the core missions and goals of Click Therapeutics in this space?
Oh, it's very clear, and it's very patient-centric. It's democratizing access to high-quality therapeutics. we know that there are tremendous barriers. Even if you manage to get a drug approved, right? Distribution, supply, payer coverage, accessibility. There might be restrictions. Certain populations, might not have access to it. And when I say populations, I mean there are social determinants of health, but then there are actually medical or special populations in pregnancy, advanced age, if you have multiple diseases or comorbidities at the same time, if you have drug-drug interactions. You're taking a drug for your diabetes, but it might actually influence your heart failure type of drug and going on board. So our whole thesis was, let's try to obliterate those barriers. Let's do it with the software as a medicine component. And more recently, we have been paving the way for software to be combined with drugs, software enhanced drugs. And when I say that, the software has independent clinical benefit. But now when you put it with a prescribed drug or a drug in development, you get the synergy. You get maximum efficacy, safety, and tolerability. And the FDA recently issued a draft guidance paving the way for this new software-enhanced drugs combinations. And it's called PDURS, PEDRS, Draft Guidance, Prescription Drug Use-Related Software. And in a nutshell, it says, all of that greatness that software provides, what I was talking about on hitting the drug outcomes and endpoints. Well, if you study that with the drug, whatever you could get extracted out of that software can go now into the drug label. And if you're not familiar with drug labels, as doctors, we would always read the drug labels. Well, this is what it's indicated for. These are the contraindication safety events. This is how it did in the clinical trials that led to its approval. It's a big move. Yeah.
Indeed. I think you mentioned the draft guidance from the FDA. I think that's really going to be game changing. And for the FDA, a regulatory body like that, to recognize this burgeoning field, I think that's huge. And so you mentioned software enhanced drugs. And so how do they really lend to the personalization of medicine? You did touch upon how these drugs are paired with specific software, whether delivered through your smartphone or other avenues. And so what really is sort of the marrying of the two, and how would a patient obtain that essentially from their healthcare provider?
Oh, I love the question, because there have been some really amazing solutions that were developed, but the implementation were very poor. So the actual patients in need never got them. And we're trying to reverse the script over there. If you think about it, before a patient even leaves the encounter, and the encounter now could be virtual through a telemedicine visit or in clinic, they could engage in therapy right then and there by dispensing an access code that goes right into their smartphone. They are in their first therapeutic lesson, and now the doctor knows, hey, they're engaged in an efficacious prescription digital therapeutic therapy, and while they're waiting for the drug component to be delivered to them, right? Whether dispensed to their pharmacy or digital pharmacies or things of that nature. I think that's what it really opens up. The other thing it really captures is that individualization or personalization. When you have a smartphone, the very first thing that we establish is something called the Digital Working Alliance. So when you go to your doctor, why do you follow their recommendations if they're telling you, well, you got to make these lifestyle changes, you got to take these medications, you got to get these procedures done, and maybe I have to refer you to these specialists, right? Why do you follow that? Well, there's a principle to this. It's called a therapeutic alliance between doctors and patients. And the alliance is a measure of, well, how well do you trust each other? What's the rapport like? What's the bond like? But a very important factor, and this is often missed to face-to-face therapy, is the shared functional goal. Your goal, patient goal, is the same as my goal, clinician goal. And if you break down that ultimate goal into a series of steps, that goal is achievable. We managed to capture all of that into the first weeks of our prescription digital therapeutics, and we call that the Digital Working Alliance. And in fact, when we develop our prescription digital therapeutics, we maximize engagement on the digital working lines because there's a measure for us to monitor that in clinical trials. And only until we reach a satisfactory level, then we deliver the therapeutic content and exercises, the neuromodulation and behavioral changes, because I think it's essential to have a strong DWA.
That's fantastic to really hear about how that workflow pans out. I think that's really important for audiences, and whether it's industry professionals to of course, the end user, the patient, to really understand how this fits into the therapeutic landscape overall, because I think it's such a new and niche field. So that's very, very exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you did mention about clinical trials and how digital therapeutics are subject to, of course, the same rigor, but a different form of rigor. I was reading about this before this interview. And so I'd like to know more about what the clinical development pathway is for digital therapeutics and how it differs from traditional pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I will maybe take it one step further from difference from traditional pharmaceuticals. I think I first have to separate how are prescription digital therapeutics different from any apps, wellness apps and so on.
Great point. Yeah,
First,
that's important to know.
Yeah, exactly. Because you could open up the app store and you could type in any symptom that you have or even disease that you have, and you're going to see a laundry list of it. Well, it's totally separate. And I think the most simplest corollary is think of we are developing prescription digital medicines, while what is out there might be more vitamins, nutraceuticals, supplementations, right? What do I mean by that? Well, we had to intentionally apply a lot of clinical rigor in not just in the build, but the validation of our products, meaning we have to develop huge clinical trials, validate them in clinical trials, hit the drug endpoints. When I say drug endpoints, there are drugs, they measure the effect of change on a inventory, a scale or a biomarker, a lab or imaging study, something of that nature. We do the same and we show that it's highly effective. It's statistically significant. These are randomized controlled trials. So people are getting either one of a sham or a digital therapeutic. So then you could subtract the difference, treatment difference. We're applying all of the clinical rigor that went into the last 100 years of modern drug development into prescription digital therapeutics. So that's the very first separation, is how is it different from wellness apps and even digital therapeutics that aren't prescription, right? Because we need FDA clearance, strong evidence base, and so on. Now, let me answer the heart of your question is how is it different than traditional pharmaceuticals? Actually, efficacy-wise, I want them to be on par. Because everyone, even patients, providers, payers, healthcare systems, and manufacturers, we all know that there's a high evidence bar. Just like in real estate, it's location, location, location. In my field, it is evidence, evidence, evidence. And you got to show that these are rigorous, high quality, done under quality management systems, meeting FDA, ICH, ISO. These are all acronyms, but there are standards, regulatory performance standards that we have to meet. That's one. But I actually don't even want to compare them to traditional therapeutics because when you pair standard therapeutics, chemical drugs or biologics with the software components, getting back to the software enhanced drugs, that's when you get ultimate level of personalization, immediate delivery. You can now have multiple shots on target. Hit, whatever you're trying to achieve with your drug, maybe substantiate or amplify the signal. If there are some safety effects related to the drug, we could actually mitigate or buffer against it. And I can give you concrete examples. We recently closed out on 2 phase 3 migraine trials. And I'm talking about over 500 patients in that pivotal registrational migraine trial. In fact, it was such a momentous moment for Click Therapeutics because the FDA even granted breakthrough device designation to this program. It was one of our first that we achieved as a company and a handful that I've done in my entire career. So proud moment.
It's wonderful. Congratulations. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And look, there are 1 billion people with migraine around the world, and there are dozens of treatment options. 0 people have been cured. That shows you there's still unmet need. So what we managed to do is show in these phase 3 trials that our product in investigational product and development, CT132, in the clinical studies hit the same drug endpoints for the prevention of migraine and episodic migraines. In fact, we had almost on average over a 3 monthly migraine day reduction from baseline. That's big. Take any month, reduce your monthly migraine days by 3. That's clinically significant. And we managed to get statistical significance. So now I didn't even go into the kicker. This is all patients that were using standard of care prescribed migraine medications. So now you can see we're getting effect on top of background medications. So the synergy makes total sense now for that pairing to happen. Yeah.
And so when you're selecting a therapeutic to pair with the software and to pair with this technology, how do you decide which therapeutics are well suited to be transformed into a software enhanced therapeutic? What is that? What goes into that decision making? And that decision making is true for any pharma biotech company. When they have drug candidates, they have to strategize in terms of which ones they want to go or pull through through clinical development. So what's the strategy for software enhanced therapeutics?
Yeah, I love the question. And exactly, I try to apply those same principles of, hey, I have something promising in the discovery land, right? That was effective on molecular assays or animal models. Now I need to advance it. And I need to know what indications I'm advancing it to when I introduce it into the clinic, into human trials. We apply those very similar principles. In fact, we have at Click Therapeutics a whole discovery lab and translational lab with computational neuroscientists and biologists and physicians and psychologists and so on. And we're developing these neuromodulation exercises or activities or tasks, right? And then we test them out against a variety of diseases. And when we get that signal of efficacy, it's moving the mark on that disease, then we choose to advance it, right, across that. But let me take a step back. How do we choose, first of all, which neuromodulation to develop or behavioral therapy and what diseases to go after? Well, it's really threefold. The first is, first and foremost, always, where's the unmet need out there? Where are patients still suffering? What diseases, where are there inadequate therapies based on existing, right, therapeutics and the landscape? The second is our platform. We've been around for a while and we validated ourselves and built this huge therapeutic and tech platform. And when I talk about that, we started off in smoking cessation, the most addictive substance in the world, nicotine, right? Cigarettes. Then we moved into major depressive disorder. Hey, this is not a niche population. There's 20% of the world kind of suffers from this. And in fact, it's even a harder group. It's people who don't respond to their first line antidepressants, right? And then we took it into schizophrenia. Well, schizophrenia is a chronic, serious mental illness, but we are treating an aspect where there is no drug treatment approved. It's called negative symptoms. These are the things that are preventing them from reintegrating in society, and so on and so on. So we developed now this whole therapeutic and tech platform. We map them onto the unmet need, and then I look at what I'm doing in my discovery apparatus. Where am I getting those hit signals and target identifications, essentially? And then hence you look at our pipeline. If you look at our pipeline, they have moved now well beyond traditional psychiatric illnesses, where neurological indications and pain indications, like in migraine, in chronic pain disorders. We've done studies over here on chronic pain syndrome at large, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetic neuropathy. We've moved even into inflammatory and autoimmune conditions, atopic dermatitis and plaque psoriasis, because there's a big biobehavioral and neuromodulatory component there. We've certainly advanced in cardiometabolic space. And I'm talking about, we have a candidate for obesity. And we've actually acquired the assets of a formerly publicly traded company called Better Therapeutics that had an FDA de novo cleared application for type 2 diabetes that we are using as part of that solution for obesity. I could go on, and I'm so excited to say that there's no therapeutic area, maybe outside of trauma medicine or something of that nature, that we can't target and either affect, the efficacy profile or the safety tolerability profile. Yeah.
And are there certain classes of therapeutics that are better suited to be paired with software technologies for software enhanced drugs? Let's say neuromodulatory therapeutics or based medicine versus traditional small molecule pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, very much so. So it's in line with that whole Click software enhanced drugs, thesis backed by the Peters guidelines from the draft guidelines from the FDA. I think right now, if there are diseases or drugs that still have some residual needs, they're hitting drug endpoints, but they might have a sub item on their scale that they can't necessarily go. And or there's a safety event, let's say GI intolerance, gastrointestinal intolerance, and I know that I could apply some behavioral interventions on that. It might be proper hydration or dieting or things of that nature. Or there is a adherence or compliance component. Now, you couple those three, virtually every disease pretty much can be matched. But you could probably see, hey, there's a strong, sub-items my efficacy. There is a safety signal, and hey, maybe we're not having the most adherence in my phase 2 studies or something of that nature. It's a match made in heaven then for a pharma company and we to partner together to make software enhanced drugs.
Amazing. And in terms of, the new wave of technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, and all of that, how does that incorporate into prescription digital therapeutics?
Well, I like to say that our drugs get smarter with every patient. And it's not just a tagline and a marketing statement. Literally, the way that we built our therapeutic platform, we learn from individual patients and then individual use from that patient. What's the right time to intervene? What's the right mechanism of action, digital mechanism of action to offer them at this time, right? What's the right engagement, style, tone, sentiment, to get folks in? And I can now go on because we're pairing with drugs. What's the right medication to be on? What's the right dosage to be on? What's the right timing to be on? Should it be actually concoction or combination type of things? The sky is the limit of the use of AI to modulate all the sensor level information that our platforms have accumulated and create these digital smart pills. It's really incredible. Yeah.
And on the regulatory end, you did mention the FDA's new draft guidance. And so in terms of how does the regulatory process differ specifically for this class of therapeutics, and how you did mention, of course, that this draft guidance opens doors and really will help the development of this space. And so what specifically sets the regulatory pathway apart for a software enhanced drug or a prescription digital therapeutic versus others?
Absolutely. Let me address it in a nutshell, what the regulatory landscape is. So I think you can now see prescription digital therapeutics can be offered as standalone therapy. So patients could get it not coupled with any particular drug, but they could maintain their drugs that they're on and use this complementary to their existing therapies. And the FDA has a very clear pathway for that. It treats the prescription digital therapeutic as a software as a medical device, SAMD. And there are particular guidelines and regulations looking at it. We, for instance, go always after class 2 software as a medical device, meaning we want to make a treatment claim and we have to prove out that we have the clinical backing to make that treatment claim. And therefore, we have to submit the clinical trial results under special controls it's got. And I'll spare you the nuances, but that's a very clear-cut pathway, and there have been a multitude of software as medical devices cleared through that pathway. Now, with this whole Peters draft guidance enabling Click and others, right, software-enhanced drugs, this is going to be looked at by the Centers for Drug Evaluation, right, CDER or CBER, together with the center that manages medical devices, CDRH. Devices and radiological health. And we are just testing this out right now. Because it's a fresh guidance, we can now push through and have exchanges with the agency, with the FDA, and this cross-center or institutional collaborations to see how this happened. Yeah.
That is so interesting. So you have two divisions essentially within the FDA evaluating the applications for this drug class. That's very interesting. Is
exactly.
This kind of niche, unique, one of a kind to software enhanced drugs, or are there other examples?
Yeah, and the beauty is, Ayesha, I think it's it really is borrowed from tangible medical devices. And so there have been everything from, believe it or not, a tongue depressor is a medical device, but then there are more complex medical devices like robotic surgery, right? That go on board. So there have been medical devices that have been paired with drugs. For example, there is MySite, Abilify MySite. So Abilify is an atypical antipsychotic used for a variety of diseases, including its schizophrenia. And then MySite is an ingestible pill sensor that says, oh, that drug was taken and it actually went through the GI system and all of that thing. So Abilify was married with MySite by a company called Otsuka Pharmaceuticals and Proteus Health. And they managed to actually submit a new drug application and get that combination approved. Now, we hopefully will be the first that now exercises the software, Peter's draft guidance, but it's all based on that tangible medical device combinations. Yeah.
It's so exciting, charting new territories and paving the way. I mean, essentially, this is so amazing. And so in terms of taking it to the clinic, and so how are you working with healthcare providers, insurers, of course, the landscape in the U.S., to integrate your digital therapeutic solutions into standard of care? And then also, related to that, what role does patient feedback play in the development of your digital therapeutic products? Because you mentioned that for one of my very first questions is that Click is very patient-centric and that it's all about the patient. So how does that all play into the development and ultimate implementation into the clinic?
Absolutely. And let me address those extremely important stakeholders. I almost call them, we do it in the co-development fashion. I believe every life science company says that they're patient-centric, but very few of them can say that you've actually co-developed your therapeutic together. And we are honored and really privileged to say that. And let me give you an example. So I'll start off with the patients, then I'll move on to the providers. So ultimately, we're doing it for patients, and we got to assess, not only are we assessing what their unmet needs are with existing therapy, we actually partnered with patient-owned cooperatives. And right, it's really fascinating for the likes of like Savvy is one of them in particular, and found out, hey, where are your pain points? And then we develop sometimes mock-ups and we show it to them and they come back to them. We might develop some prototypes and go back to them and so on. This is really hand-in-hand developed. And you really can't do that with drugs, right? It's not like they designed the chemical or the molecule or the biologic. That's why I think it's a unique honor and privilege that we have. And obviously in the validation process, they're involved with the high degree of representation in our clinical trials. Because we are digitally delivered, I can go to every walks of life, every corner of the United States, right? And as long as I could transmit this over the air through Wi-Fi or cellular plans right to your smartphone, you don't have to travel to a major metropolitan center to enroll in clinical trials and then get IVs and infusions and drugs and all of that. You actually really don't. We try to make it maximum inclusivity, maximum diversity, maximum patient voice in the therapeutic plus the validation that's going on. And last but not least is a stakeholder you talk about is providers. So I still happen to be a provider. I still keep a small practicing neurology clinic and serve on the medical staff of a few hospitals. I'll tell you, we have to integrate into the existing infrastructure or enhance existing infrastructure. We can't anticipate it's now going to revolutionize because I have highly efficacious prescription digital therapeutics. We invented a brand new study type. It's called implementation learning studies, or ILSs. So what we go out there, much like we do clinical trials and we try to prove out if this PDT really works, we go out there into healthcare systems and prove out where the challenging and pain points are, or where are the points of synergy and integration in healthcare systems, in multi-specialty practices, in solo provider practices. And that's not just a provider. It's usually how is the patient being seen? How is the allied, the nursing staff, the medical assistants, the schedulers, all of that, including the provider and the healthcare system. And then let's alleviate all those pain points where it really is as seamless as a patient comes into the clinic or on the virtual healthcare visits and gets the appropriate diagnosis by the clinician, by by the provider. And in the click of a button, much like they can prescribe any drug right now in their electronic healthcare records, they can prescribe our FDA-cleared prescription digital therapeutics. But the beauty is immediate dispensement, immediate knowledge that it's being used. And the data and the rich data and feedback that comes back can be acted on right then and there and on follow-up visits. Yeah.
Amazing. And so, Dr. Lakhan, in your opinion, what are some of the upcoming developments, innovations that you expect and are most excited about within your company and in general, the field of prescription digital therapeutics? And where do you think the space is heading? And what are some of the exciting opportunities for the industry? And of course, with Click at the forefront of all of that.
Yeah, I'm going to be really bold. So I think so far I've discussed that we've managed to collaborate with major pharmaceutical companies, go through phase developments, and get clearance and marketed products in very difficult to treat diseases, like in incomplete responders to antidepressants for major depressive disorder symptoms. We're doing the same in phase 3 trials with Boehringer Ingelheim in negative symptoms of schizophrenia that has no therapeutic approved on the market, in the States. And then I showed you that we closed out on migraine trials and we're getting drug-like effects. I'm going to be so bold to say is I envision a future where every drug is paired with a software component. Because if you look at all our industries, Ayesha, when's the last time that you managed your checkbook, right? And you're using a paper and pencil and we're guessing, what your balance was and what your transactions were. No, when digital came into that industry, there was no going back. No going back and you could probably go into every sector. I think we need to have a digitization of the pharmaceutical and larger medicine space beyond just telemedicine, which is, delivery of healthcare. We need to expand where the therapeutics are also a part and integral in the delivery of that healthcare. Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, going from right from the clinic in terms of seeing your provider, getting a diagnosis through to treatment. So you envision really that life cycle to have this software enhanced component, which is revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Dr. Lakhan, thank you so much for being on the show today, for your time, your insights, and really sharing so much about this cutting edge, innovative field, which I'm so excited to share with our audiences. So I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, and thank you, Ayesha, for allowing me to speak to the next frontier of medicine. So I appreciate it.
It was an absolute pleasure. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we shall see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.